Mr. Andrew DeAngelo. How are you, sir?
Great to be with you today. I'm doing well. Very good. Thank you very much for asking.
Of course, man. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm really excited to have you on once again. I think this is a three-peat for you. This is number three.
Well, I really enjoy being with you and your audience, and it's always a fun conversation. So I'm looking forward to another one.
Absolutely, yeah. And what we'll be talking about today, I think, will be part one of kind of a three-part mini series, where Andrew, I really want to just have you on to discuss your expertise and really what you're doing now as a global cannabis consultant, right, and a strategic advisor. And so there's a lot of different topics and components and facets within all of that, right? This is a very complex industry right now. And so, given your background, you're the perfect person to talk about this with. So today we'll be discussing, the mistakes that, common mistakes that cannabis startups make. And then the other series we'll talk about financial management. And then third episode, we'll kind of talk about three traits of high functioning teams. But for today, let's talk about, there's a lot of, people wanting or even starting to enter the cannabis industry, right? There's this quote unquote green rush that's kind of out there, but there could be a lot of exuberance as well. So, Andrew, talk to us about, what you've seen in terms of eager, operators that are looking to jump in, and kind of what you see as some pitfalls that happen right out the gate.
Sure. Well, irrational exuberance is always something to be mindful of, and in any industry or any moment that's happening in any kind of market, and that's no exception in the cannabis industry. So there's been moments of irrational exuberance. Right now, we're in a moment of rational collapse, I guess you'd call it, in the industry. So we're contracting as an industry right now. We're not growing as an industry, except brand new markets that are coming on that become legal at the state level. Of course, those are new markets, so they represent growth. But by and large, mature legal markets like where I am here in California or Colorado or Washington or Massachusetts, we're seeing contraction happening, and we're seeing big companies, MSOs, lay people off, and people are losing jobs instead of getting more jobs. So it's a different moment now than some of our previous conversations, perhaps,
Right.
but but I think still some of the common pitfalls are, people do still underestimate the complexity of the cannabis industry, how difficult it is. A lot of people think cannabis money from cannabis kind of grows on trees, and it's pretty easy to come by, and it's not. Uh, uh, and I see people either modeling their businesses wrong on paper, and then when they actually go to do it, it's not right, or um, they're not positioning themselves correctly in the market with respect to people that might have a lot more resources than they do. So the other common mistake I see people make once they do open their doors is they don't save enough money for taxes, so with the cash flow that's coming in. And so when the 280E taxes come due, or some of the excise taxes, or some of the other taxes that the business unit may collect, they don't have the cash to pay them and make payroll and all the other things. So that's another common error that you see a lot of, especially on retail businesses, on the supply chain, or even cultivation at the beginning and end of the supply chain is generally where most of the taxes happen.
Right.
So those, so we see that. I think that folks, you need a lot of different skill sets on your team when you start up a cannabis company or organization, and a consultant like me will give you the kind of advice you need to make sure you're not missing anybody that you need or missing any skill sets that you need, and we'll also make sure that the skill sets you do need, you'll get the very best of the best in the industry and in that's available right now. So that's sort of where it's important to have some good advice, somebody like me, and someone with experience and knowledge, and knows how also to communicate those things to others and teach others. A lot of what you do as an advisor or consultant is you're generally just teaching others what you've already learned, right? And sometimes you've learned those things by having massive success, like we did at Harborside, and Last Prisoner Project, and then sometimes you learn those things from having making massive mistakes, like taking a company public at the wrong time, like we did with Harborside. So it and all these things, both the successes and the mistakes, give you a lot of experience and knowledge, and you can make sure that the things you got right, other people emulate, and the things you got wrong, other people avoid. and by doing that, I find that my clients are very successful on their own once we're done working together. There's always a moment where I have to pass the baton because I specialize in building the businesses from the startup, from the time someone has a license to the time they open their door. That section of building a business, a startup, is in cannabis, especially retail and consumption models, hospitality models. That's sort of the sweet spot for me and my team. And so, that's the place that we like to be at the most. And at the end of that process, when the business, we cut the ribbon with the client, and the press is there, and then generally the clients run the business themselves, and me and my team move on to the next clients.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's all great advice. I mean, especially the point about saving for, taxes, right? Because if you're not really familiar with how many taxes are imposed either at the state level, at the federal level, it can become as a shock, right? I mean, in some cases, it's almost 50% out the gate. I mean, so
Yeah.
it's crazy. Yeah. And I like that point. And I want to talk to you. So you mentioned, the contraction that's currently happening in this current environment within the industry, right? And so, but you talk about how you specialize with startups and bringing them kind of to a point where they're operating, and hey, you're up, you're running, it's time for you to now run the business. So how has the current climate within the cannabis industry maybe affected startups, and kind of what is your guidance for them as they can kind of navigate through these difficult times?
Well, the two most difficult things for cannabis startups right now is finding capital and financing for the businesses. As we've had contraction, and we've seen all the publicly traded stocks, cannabis stocks, including Harborside, collapse in value by 80-90% over the last several years, really. But in the last 18 months, very badly. Even the biggest and best and brightest of them have fallen by 80-90%. So it's in that environment, investors are reluctant to invest in startups. If the big companies are losing money and stock prices are collapsing, what's going to happen in a startup? So the cost of capital is higher right now than it might have been 18 months ago for startups, and harder to find, just very hard to find, especially cultivation and retail. Those are sort of the two most difficult spots to raise money for right now for plant touching companies. And I would say, the other obstacle is always just complying. Cannabis compliance for a startup is much different than compliance in any other industry, and every state has a different framework, legalization framework, regulatory framework, tax framework, and all these rules. And you wouldn't believe how intense the rules are. And so those of you that are listening that are in the industry or license holders, you know what I'm talking about. And so if you get some of those compliance things wrong as a startup, you can get pretty hefty fines. You can get your license delayed or yanked. And this can be very costly. I've had clients that spent a couple $1,000,000, got down to the very end, the last month, 2, 3 before they opened, and all of a sudden there's a problem with the regulator and that they didn't see, and they're delayed by 2 or 3 months, and they run out of money. They run out of money and they can't open. And then they're a distressed asset, and all of a sudden they're having different conversations with investors than they were ever hoping to have, and they haven't even opened the doors yet. So these are the kind of things that can really sink you as a cannabis startup. I know we'll talk about this in other episodes, but I think also you got to have the right team and the right culture that binds that team together. As a cannabis startup, it's critical. If you don't have the right attorney, you don't have the right compliance person, you don't have the right consultant, you don't have the right master grower, you don't have the right general manager for your store, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So those are some of the big ones.
What are some ways that startups can approach the hiring process, right? But we all know that human capital is very important, but it's hard to come by. So kind of what is your philosophy in terms of finding the right match in terms of culture, mindset, all the above?
Well, you have to know who you are and what you're looking for. That's really the first thing. If you don't know what your culture is, what your values are, what your mission statement is, if you haven't done those things yet, do them, because you want to match candidates with those missions and with those values. Doesn't mean everybody's got to be the same. You want a diverse group of people. You want people with different political affiliations and different backgrounds and different races and creeds, and you want all that on your team. You want diversity. That's something I absolutely recommend for folks. You be stronger. Plus, your customers are diverse, and you want to be able to speak to everybody. But
you want everybody rowing in the same direction, right? I mean, you don't want someone who's not, I guess, totally bought in on the mission or the mindset, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah. So some clients I have, they want to create a really transactional culture where people are on time and moving fast and making a lot of sales and hitting their numbers, and that's the kind of culture they want, And so right. we build one of those. That doesn't mean it can't be a vibrant place to work that people love, because some people like that kind of environment. Other clients, they want to build something a lot more collaborative, less command and control, less transactional, more cultural, more connected, to slow down the experience a little bit. Give people a deeper dive into service or products or what have you. Not so much a turn and burn experience. So there's more than one way to slice the culture pie, if you will, but that's why you have to know who you are and what your values and mission are all about, because then you can go out and recruit for that. If I've got a dispensary, the kind of person I get to be my inventory manager might be much different than the kind of person I get to be my sales manager, which might be much different than the type of person I get to be my security manager. And so people could have different styles, but yes, you want people to share the mission, to wake up in the morning, and if the values, it says be nice to each other, you can't be an a-hole. I mean, you just can't. If you are, you'll get fired probably, or if you have a very transactional culture and there's somebody who's more, less transactional and a little bit more collaborative and connected and maybe doesn't fit in as good, right? And that person might find themselves getting write-ups or separation conversations, so yeah, and it's costly to separate from employees, and it's costly to get these things wrong, and it's emotionally taxing on everybody, right? No, it's no
Right.
fun to have. It's no fun to have those conversations. No fun to be on the receiving end of those conversations. We've all been there. So, it's really important to spend enough time on recruitment. And what people do is they just put something on Indeed. They have a phone interview, maybe a 15-minute interview, and then they hire somebody. And that's not enough time. You got to spend more time than that. You got to spend a couple hours with people, especially if they're in leadership roles, management roles. Call their references. Don't hire people without calling the references. Make sure that people are being truthful on their resumes. Things like that. And because if someone's not truthful on their resume, they're not going to be truthful in your business.
Right.
When push comes to shove,
Yep.
when push comes to shove and you have to stay 4 hours late because the seed to sale tracking system went down, you have to manually, oh yeah, you can fudge it and get it done in 2 hours, like cheating on your resume a little bit. You could cheat on that a little bit, or you can do it right. And, and that's the kind of thing that you see, that sort of, so check people out and make sure that it's the right fit. And you want the employee to feel like they're having the right fit with you too. I mean, make sure they're asking you questions too, like, what kind of boss are you? So you can communicate. Hey, the way I like to manage people is X, Y, and Z. I like
Right.
you to, I'm a pace setter. I'm all about setting the pace, or I'm all about taking our time, really understanding how we're going to be interacting with the market. And everyone has a different how they want to manage and how they want, and communicating that with people is really smart, because you'll be able to tell right away in the interview if somebody's connecting with that. Their body language will be like, oh no, this person's a pace setter.
Right. And
Or
it's, I
they'll,
mean,
yeah.
and it seems like companies more are like open to the candidate really kind of driving the conversation, because I mean it was, at least before a lot of the layoffs, it was a candidate's market, right? I mean, it was the candidate really was able to select where they wanted to be, what culture fit their personal background or beliefs, and the company had to kind of adhere to that. I mean, so you make good points, like it goes both ways, right?
Yeah, no, and even though we're in a contraction in our industry because the new markets are coming online, and because overall there's still a lot of growth in certain areas, there's a lot of hiring. It's still happening, in the cannabis industry. So it's still, there's still a lot going
Mm-hmm.
on to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you talked about, you mentioned some of the challenges that plant touching operators or startups currently face, right? And capital raising being one, obviously, with the current economic market. Um, but my question is like, are there other opportunities outside of plant touching that maybe you've helped consult with, or maybe that would be a viable option for just someone who, or a team that's ready to just jump in, but just doesn't necessarily maybe know where to fit in at this point, given the market?
Yes, I do. One of the things I'm very excited about right now is industrial hemp. And I have a whole industrial hemp part of my business, and consultants and farmer consultants and others that work with industrial hemp. And you don't need a license, and you don't need to pass intense laboratory tests and things like that. So it's a much lower barrier to entry. It's also, if you're talking about CBD and stuff like that, very competitive and saturated right now. But if you're talking about nutrition or fiber or paper or hempcrete or building materials, it's not. And so I'm excited about what's going on with industrial hemp. And you know, anything plant touching, especially retail and cultivation, it's expensive and it's complicated and it's hard. You need a lot of expertise. Manufacturing's a little bit in the middle of the supply chain. Let's say you want to make gummies or you want to make vape pen, or that's a little bit lower capital burden. And a lot of people can differentiate themselves with how they formulate their product in the manufacturing zone of the supply chain. And so I help a lot of clients in that. But there's also auxiliary businesses, right, that folks can get into, whether it be marketing and PR and branding. I help a lot of clients with that part of their businesses, or packaging and machines that are used in all kinds of operations up and down the supply chain, grow equipment, retail equipment, POS systems, security cameras, software, technology, drones.
Yeah, over
drones,
fields, right? Over greenhouses. I mean,
yeah, I mean, there's
aerial
drones.
photography. Yeah.
Yeah, there's drones doing security and stuff like that now. And so there's the world is, it's a big wide world in cannabis right now. And there's so many different places that one could enter. Now you're going to find competition. Unless you're an entrepreneur that's really good at figuring out what a problem that you can solve with your idea that nobody else has solved yet. That's always a really,
that's the $1 million question.
Well, right? that's always kind of where you want to be, right?
Yeah.
But that's like 2% of the people that get to do that. The other 98% have to figure out how to make a living too. So it's that's where being good at what you do and understanding where you need to be, what your business, what kind of business you should own and operate, and all those questions become super critical. Unless you have a lot of money. If you come from great wealth or can raise great sums of money, money is forgiving. So you can make mistakes, and the only thing that's happened is you lost some money. If you're like come from a background that's a little more working class, and at some point the money's gone, I lost. It's all gone. There is no more. Then that's a much bigger crisis. Right. And you can't have that happen, right? That just can't happen unless sometimes you go bankrupt. It does happen to entrepreneurs. And it's happened to me before in my career. Not for a long time, but early in your career as an entrepreneur, you get it wrong. You get right. Or you're too early, or you're too late, or whatever. There's so much has to go right as an entrepreneur. And some of it's luck, some of it's timing. It has nothing to do with how brilliant you are.
No, it's timing, it's luck, and failure is inevitable, to your point. I mean, that's what shapes and builds an entrepreneur, right? I mean, you don't start as an entrepreneur. No one has ever started as an entrepreneur and just been successful. There has been pitfalls, there has been challenges, there has been failures upon failure until you get it right. And even then, it's not like you've made it. You're still learning and figuring it out, especially in this market, which is ever changing and evolving. And you talked about industrial hemp, which when I first started this podcast, and of course throughout, I've talked about the potential of industrial hemp, and but at the time when I was really talking about it, the infrastructure wasn't quite there. So are you starting to see more infrastructure in terms of decortication and separating the fiber from the herd, and so we can actually produce these materials you're talking about?
Yes, the technology's coming along with respect to decortication. It's there. The problem is it's expensive and it comes from offshore for the most part. And so it takes a long time to get here because generally no one wants to make one of the decortication machines until there's an order for it to be made. Because they're expensive. You're talking about, $100,000 to $500,000 machine or more.
Yeah.
And but you're right. A few years ago, they didn't exist. You had to convert, decortication from other plant crops to cannabis and hope for the best. But now there's ones just for hemp. So it's come, but it's still a cost issue and a capital issue.
Right.
Why there's not more investors in industrial hemp as compared to psychoactive cannabis, I guess you'd call it. I don't know. I don't know why, because
Same.
it seems to me that there's money to be made. Pretty because now, especially in the post-pandemic world, it's cheaper than timber. It's cheaper than cotton. It's cheaper. It's now a cheaper material. And that was always the rub on hemp was, oh, it's too expensive. You can't compete with cotton. You can't compete with timber. You can't compete. I got my way. And now it's like, no, we're cheaper. And so you get out of our way. But we can't move everyone out of the way until we have some rocket fuel, and that's capital. And so this is the issue. I know of some academic institutions that got some of the USDA grant money for industrial hemp. Wasn't that much. The people that should have gotten it, because I applied for a grant with my buddy Doug Fine, who's a hemp author and farmer, and we didn't get one. We didn't get ours, but we're going to keep trying, and hopefully the righteous folks that really know how to do this and are regenerative farming in a real authentic way. Sometimes the government money gets siphoned off by, shall we say, connected institutions and people. I won't use the corruption word, but in the
We would
case
never
of,
use corruption. Never, never.
but in the case of some of this grant money that's available for like carbon sequestration and things like that, there's so much money available that some of it might spill down to the good guys and gals working on it, as well as the more connected ones. But every hemp plant that goes into the ground is, as long as it actually goes into the ground, not into a bucket of soil, but into the ground, it sequesters carbon, and
Right.
that's good. That's a good thing, for all of us, and let's hope that the kind of capital that part of hemp industry really needs will come in really soon, because there's just an enormous opportunity. Just in the last few years, we've seen tremendous strides with hemp cosmetics and hemp clothing. I should have worn more than I am today. I usually wear nothing but hemp, but it's coming.
Yeah.
The fabrics are more luxurious, and they're soft and they feel great on your skin. And I just got some Patagonia hemp socks that were hemp. And I think some other blend of recycled material, and they're super awesome. I mean, they're comfortable and they're warm, and they're Patagonia, so you can climb a mountain with the darn things on, and your feet will be just fine. And so this is the promise of hemp, and it's starting to become not just a promise but reality, and so I'm excited to work on it, for the next decade or so.
Yeah. I mean, with all the talk of climate change and of course, the talks of racism and just all these issues that we're discussing as a society. Hemp and cannabis solve and address, or at least address a lot of those issues, right? Hemp, as you just touched on, I mean, the possibilities and the benefits are endless. It sequesters the oil, like you said, and I think it's one of the highest plants that take in CO2 emission, right, within the whole botanical kingdom. It enriches the soil. So if you ever wanted to grow anything organic, you would definitely plant hemp first. And not to mention all the things that you could create. The yield time compared to growing a tree, right, to make clothing, compared to just how many is it? 2 weeks to yield hemp just straight for industrial purposes.
It takes a summer to grow it, but a tree takes years, right?
Right.
And you can produce as much paper on 1 acre of hemp as you can 4 acres of trees.
It's just some of this is just a no-brainer. So, I mean, if some of our political leaders were really serious about, again, tackling and addressing a lot of these problems, we would look to hemp. I mean, look to what we've kind of done in the past. It's not, so we're relearning this stuff, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
that's right. That's right. And now that we live in a more modern world, we should be able to leverage a lot more knowledge and technology to hemp. And it's still going to be a labor-intensive crop, and it's going to require people. Cannabis is always about people, and that means localized. A lot of localized parts of the hemp economy are going to be local, and that's a good thing, not a bad thing.
right, right.
And so, so yes, it's a very ancient thing that's coming back now. Before we knew how to take oil out of the ground and burn it and make synthetic fabrics out of it. We made all of our clothes out of plants, cotton or flax or hemp. Flax is just is linen, comes from the flax plant, very similar to hemp plant, and long fibrous plant. And cotton, unfortunately, requires a lot of pesticides to grow. And when you grow cotton organically, the yields are very, very low compared to non-organic cotton farming, which has 80 or 90% of the more yield. So bugs really like cotton a lot. As you can imagine, it's this soft, fluffy stuff. What's not to love? So that's the issue with cotton as a plant. A huge amount of all the pesticides used in all of agriculture combined are cotton. I think it's like 40%. Just for the one crop, cotton. And we can replace all that or a good chunk of it with hemp, and it could make a huge difference quite quickly. And as you mentioned, the places that cotton was growing before that was saturated with pesticides, you can use hemp as a rotation crop to help that soil and to bring that soil back. And maybe even use the hemp at the same time. So we still have a lot to learn, and there's still a lot of work that needs to be done with technology, as you mentioned, machinery, as you mentioned, genetics, cultivars. The best fiber cultivars are not the best nutrition cultivars. Well, can we make a cultivar where it's good for all of those things, so you can just grow one plant and get multiple things from the one plant. That's how you make hemp products really cheap, is if the farmer or the manufacturer can make more than one thing out of the same plant. So if you can make clothes out of the fiber and you can make plastics out of the hurd from the same plant, well, you're rocking and rolling, because your cost on both of those raw materials just went down by half. And that's what's great about hemp, is you can make more than one thing out of it. Whereas cotton, you can really only make fiber out of cotton, I think. I mean, there might be a few other things you can make out of cotton, but not much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and I want to switch gears now. I want to talk, more about the startups and how, when they're getting launched, we talked about some of the pitfalls that they could really look out for. You talked about some best practices in terms of getting started. How important is, and I know coming from you, of course, you're going to have strong feelings about this, the social justice and equity component of it. And, even if they may, the company or business may not be focused on specific issues when it relates to social justice, social equity. What are some other programs that maybe they could focus on that actually, contribute to the community and give back? And why is that important?
Well, yes, I do have strong feelings about that. I don't think you should work with this plant unless you are prepared to give back to the communities that have been most affected by prohibition in one way or another, or give back just to the community in general. Cannabis is about teaching us how to be more generous with each other, and we have to not just feel that when we share cannabis together, but we have to live that. And if we don't live that, we're kind of living a lie as cannabis people. And so the new folks coming in, especially entrepreneurs that may not have a relationship with cannabis or coming in from other industries, other businesses, always encourage them to start a relationship with a cannabis charity. Maybe it's Last Prisoner Project, maybe it's a different social justice or social equity nonprofit. There's a zillion of them now. In whatever state or town you live in, there's definitely a cannabis social justice or social equity nonprofit or chapter of a national nonprofit like Last Prisoner Project or others. And then there's also, cannabis helps people with cancer and kids with epilepsy, and it helps relieve people of poverty and other things. So these charities and nonprofits that help folks with cancer and epilepsy and poverty, supporting them, there's a group out here in California that they decided they were going to support food banks. And so every time you buy one of their joints, they donate a can of food. And they've donated like over 1 million pounds of food since they've been doing this for the last 10 years. And it's just remarkable. And what happens to them? Well, they get to have a press conference every time they hit another milestone with their donation and their giving. And there's a lot of goodwill that their brand has in the marketplace. And everyone knows that this company does this and works with the needy and people that are hungry. And customers want to be associated with brands that do that, especially the younger generations coming up now feel really strongly about that. Consumers coming up now feel really strongly about that. So don't get left behind.
It builds that brand affinity, right? Like you said, I mean, you want to be proud of the brand that you're purchasing or that you consume, and especially if their ideals are aligned to yours, right? Whatever their cause is. But giving back, I think, to your point, is crucial because there have been so many people that have been affected by the war on drugs or the prohibition of this plant specifically, whether it be on the medicinal side or the social justice side, the social equity side. So many people involved.
Yeah, and it's more fun. Look, jumping into the cannabis industry, one reason I hope everybody's thinking about doing it or has already done it is because it's fun. You see everybody else in the industry having a good time, and you want to too, even though it's a hard, complex industry. It's fun, and one of the things that makes it fun is the giving back part. Okay, I'm telling you, if you manage to open a dispensary, even if it's an adult use dispensary, it's not a medical dispensary. After a year or two of opening that dispensary, if your customers know who you are and you're there a lot, someone is going to come up to you someday and they're going to look you in the eye and they're going to thank you for saving their life or helping to save their life or the life of their loved one. And they're going to be really seriously like in gratitude to you for taking the risk to open this dispensary to provide access to this plant to the folks in that community. And that's what's going to make you feel, that's going to make you feel differently than all the money in the world. And when that happens to you, that's when being in the industry becomes a lot of fun, because 10 minutes after you have that meeting on the floor of your dispensary with that customer or patient, you're going to be looking at your P&L or having to pay your tax bill and the back office, and it's not going to be as fun. And so those moments, so the giving back part, and the more you make that part of your mission and brand, I advise people, the more you can afford to do that. Of course, you can't do more than you can afford, because then you're out of business, and that doesn't help anybody. But do as much as you can afford, because it'll come back a lot, especially right now. There's a lot of multi-state operators. There's a lot of consolidation happening in the industry. When that happens, those big companies, when they get bigger, they don't think about the customer. They're not thinking about the staff. They're not thinking about culture. They're not thinking about those things. They're thinking about sales, cost, units, P&Ls, drive it. When's my next press release? When my next quarterly statement? What's the number? That's what they're thinking of. They're not wrong to think that way, I guess. That's not how I want to run my businesses, but that's a big trend. And so to compete against that, or to move in a different direction than that, is where I like to play and have clients that want to do that. And that's where I really thrive as a consultant and advisor, is teaching people how to do that. And one way to do it is to have really good service and give back to the community, and embed oneself within your local community and create goodwill, because that's something that the bigger companies just can't do. They just cannot pay that kind of attention.
Right. Great. No, that's great advice. Really, Andrew, I appreciate your time today, where we discussed, common mistakes that cannabis startups make, but other best practices that they can follow when starting out the gate. We touched on industrial hemp and the opportunities that particular part of or sector of the industry presents, and the importance of giving back to the community, because, again, so many people have been affected. This was really helpful. I really appreciate it. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about your consulting services and they want to get in touch if they're starting out?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. My website's the best way, andrewdeangelo.com. If you push on the little button that says reach out to me or contact me, it'll send you right to my email. And then you can also, on social media, usually Andrew_DeAngelo on most of the platforms. LinkedIn, I'm Andrew DeAngelo. So easy to get a hold of me. Please reach out. Right now is a good time to reach out, because I've got a couple slots in my consulting calendar that are available for folks to fill up.
There you go. You heard it from the man himself. Andrew, I look forward to having you back on to discuss some of the financial management best practices and current issues that the industry are facing. But for now, man, keep at it. And it was a pleasure.
Well, I had a great time as always, and have a wonderful evening, and see you next time.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening. Bye.